Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we're bringing you another special, an interview by Illarionov-Nemirya, Ukrainian journalist, on her channel Ukraine Life, with Andrey Illarionov, who is a well-known Russian economist, former senior policy advisor to Vladimir Putin and his government back in the years of 2000 to 2005. And now he's a senior fellow at the non-government organization Center for Security Policy, which is based in Washington, D.C. in the United States. Since leaving his position with the Russian government, Illarionov became a stern critic of Putin's administration, and particularly its stance on foreign relations. Andrey Illarionov is rather pedantic. He is always operating with numbers, dates, and names. And during his interview with Illarionov-Nemirya, he brings listeners to an obvious solution to this war. Special thanks go to our members. Of course, super thanks champion is Bill. Thank you, Bill, for your continuous support. Klavs is the champion among the subscribers. Thank you, Klavs. And also additional thanks go today to John Afseth and Clever Pittsburgh. Thank you guys for sticking with us so long, and we totally appreciate your support. And with this, let's go to the interview. Enjoy. And hello again, this is Ukraine Life with Illarionov-Nemirya. We're continuing our series of streams, and I'm glad to have Andrey Illarionov with us this morning. Andrey Nikolayevich, thank you for joining us. Glad to have you. Hello, Ludmila. Thank you for the invite. I congratulate you with Christmas and with coming New Year. Thank you very much. Our congratulations to you likewise, and we do hope that in the next year you will find some time for us to perhaps come again and discuss more on the pressing issues at hand. Let's start today's stream somewhat traditionally with talking about what the next year might bring us. We do have this tradition on our channel, and these pre-New Year streams are usually designed as improvisations by our guests, and they can play however they like with conclusions from the current year or predictions and trends for the new year. And I'll be just taking notes and asking questions as we go. All right, so before we go to a discussion itself, I think I want to commend you on the number of interviews that you've taken in the last days of this year with different experts and colleagues whom you gave a chance to share their opinions on your platform. If I'm not mistaken, the video that we are recording right now is 80th in your shortlist, and I don't think anybody did anything like that in the YouTube media. And perhaps you will succeed in making a few more interviews in the remaining few days of this year, and perhaps you'll have a very unique collection of different ideas, observations, conclusions, and analytics and prognostications for the coming 2024 year and looking at the results of 2023. And it includes different experts, Ukrainian experts, Russian, American, European, all kind of analysts that you have invited. I don't think Ukraine has any other spot like yours, where there'd be so much different ideas gathered together in one place, thanks to your efforts. Thank you, Andrey Nikolayevich. Thank you so very much. All right, so a couple more words about 2023 that is leaving us before we go into the future. And I'll probably review the usual topics that we've touched upon, and we'll probably summarize the results of not just the 23, but 22 and 23, and the way that new stage of the full-scale aggression against Ukraine is unfolding right now. It could have been done in a different time, but annual conclusion is a good moment to take stock and see what's happening and what has happened, what was expected, what didn't unfold. So, at first, I want to note that there were a lot of mistakes. There were serious mistakes made by different sides involved in this conflict. And there were mistakes from Ukrainian analysts, American analysts, and Russian analysts, regardless whoever was talking about it. And main mistakes were about the stage of war, what it would look like. So predictions of the scale, duration, intensity, and character. Almost nobody succeeded 2 years ago in predicting what we are going to have on our hands today, with very rare exceptions. And a lot of information surfaced during the flow of these 2 years that should have helped to correct these analytic predictions. But we also see that the process of learning is still slow, and digesting even the information that one has in front of his eyes is very partial. I also want to say here that during our first meeting on the 11th of March 2022, when we had our first interview, after the beginning of this full-scale invasion by Russia into Ukraine, I think you and I were the only interview that were talking about this war in the framework that it will be a long, bloody, and very protracted. And the price for this war will be superbly high. And back then, during our first interview, we named the first possible date for its conclusion. At best, it was January of 2025. And it's been almost 2 years since that stream, and I think all of those predictions about the character, duration, and intensity of this war are in general fitting with what we discussed back in March of 22. Second, that I want to outline, the main mistakes that were made not only by observers, but also by the main participants of this war, by the aggressor, and sadly by Ukrainian leadership as well, and main partners of Ukraine, first of all, United States. These mistakes were mostly connected with underestimation of the intensity and scale of this war, and misunderstanding of the flows. We can talk about the supplies of ammunitions, about training of pilots, training of artillery specialists, tankers, but all this is unfolding in front of our eyes. And a lot of things were mentioned about the mistakes made by aggressor, so I don't think we should be repeating that in this stream. And we've talked about mistakes made by American power. We regularly address them, but there were also mistakes, unfortunately, made by Ukrainian leadership, Ukrainian power, both civilian and military. And what Ukrainian military are talking about in the last couple months, especially about mobilization and number of people that they need on the front to hold the line, it outlines that all these things could have been predicted. And all the necessary measures could have been taken much earlier, not now, in the expedited way, but much earlier and in a more systemic way. And Ukraine should have, of course, concentrated on acquiring additional human potential, people potential to bring it to the front, and also should have done certain steps to prepare its economy for the scenario of this war. And perhaps the resources and efforts that could have been made back in 23, 22, even in last year, these resources could have affected the situation back then, and situation on the front today could have been much better than it is now. And I think the main flow, the main laws of military action, especially when the war is big, with a serious enemy, with the enemy that has a much larger potential than the victim of the aggression, all these principles are rather well known. Maximum accumulation of all the resources, all kinds of resources, maximum redirection of all the resources to fight this war and to achieve victory, and concentration of these resources on the main directions. There is nothing new to say here. This is known since antique and pre-antiquity times, and it's been reproduced in thousands, if not in tens of thousands of manuscripts and works. But these main lessons were not considered during the last 2 years of this war. And only now, after, what was it, 22 almost months, right? Over 22 months. There is some understanding finally dawning on the participants. And now even the most optimistic commentators start to talk that this war is going to be a long and protracted one. And it took them 2 years, almost 2 years, to come to this obvious thought. Also here, I would note our conversation that happened about a year ago in the middle of January of 23, when we discussed possibilities of a new major offensive by Russian troops. You know that there were a lot of commentary, especially very much criticism that was thrown our ways after that. But now, after 11 months since that stream, we can check what actually happened. Back then, in your stream, I talked about the group of Russian troops that are invading Ukraine, that are occupying the territories. If the actions of Russian General Command and Putin continues with the flow that existed, the group will end up being in Ukraine in a total amount of about 600,000 troops. Back then, a lot of Ukrainian analysts, especially the commentators who were propagandizing from the military wing of Zelensky government, were laughing at our predictions. But several days ago, Vladimir Putin, during his press conference in Moscow, said that at present time, on the front line, according to his words, it's 617,000 troops. We, of course, are very reserved about any numbers mentioned by Putin and his administration, but this is one of those rare cases when the number is rather close to reality, and if it differs from it, it's probably a bit lower than the real number on the front. And now we also listen from the Ukrainian side that from the Ukrainian side, there are at least 600 or over 600,000 troops engaged. And that means that overall, on the front, we have slightly under 1.5 million people. And this is a characteristic of a big war that we talked about a year ago. And that is very different from those resources and those forces that were used initially to start this campaign, to kick it off in February of 22. And if back then the group that aggressor brought into Ukraine, it was obviously not enough to establish control over the Ukraine territory and to occupy that, then the current forces, the new numbers, and especially the numbers that Kremlin is now talking about, these are numbers of a different scale. They are 3, possibly 4 times exceeding the numbers that they started this campaign with. And this shows how much did the stakes grow during this 2 years on the aggressor side. They made their mistakes about 2 years ago, but then in the next 2 years, they significantly corrected those mistakes. And we need to keep that in mind when we are discussing and analyzing the perspectives and what's unfolding right now on the front. Also, one more important point that deserves to be made is that during the first 10.5 months of this large-scale aggression, from February till about mid-January of 23, from February of 22 to mid-January of 23, overall losses of the enemy, and that's mixed data from Ukrainian command and other sources, there were about 116,000. And in the next 11 and a half months, from January of 23 to the end of this year, is about 240,000 losses, so over 2 times more. So if to recalculate it in daily losses, during the first year, roughly the first year, the aggressor was losing about 350 troops per day. And during the second year of this war, the losses were about 700 troops per day. So this is not for several days, several weeks, or several months. These are long periods measured essentially as years. One almost a year and another almost a year. That means the losses grew twice in the course of the second year. And one can, of course, say that the losses of Ukrainian side have increased likely double as well. So we can say that the scale of this war grew twice during the last year. And we're going back to the estimation of the quantitative increase of the military action that we talked about in January of 23. Andrey, let me go back to some things. I was making some notes here, and perhaps some of them will serve as bridges to other elements of this discussion. I'll voice them now, and then you can answer them later. So first, you referred to the initial stream when we discussed that this war likely will be a protracted war and will last at least January of 25 until the results of elections in the United States. Now, would you repeat the same thesis now or not? Oh, yes. Next one. You also said this will be a long war, but long war can be perceived differently, right? It can go with different levels of intensity, just like you demonstrated that the first year it had one level of intensity, the second year was different. So my next question is, since the intensity doubled, essentially, right, during this year, how do you think long this intensity can be continued in the wars of that scale, when there are 1.5 million engaged in the front and all other factors considered? I would say it can go for a long time. To compare, we can take the events of Soviet-Finnish War, or the Winter War, also known as Winter War. During that period, it was 105 days, if I'm not mistaken. The losses of Red Army were not only the numbers that I named, those are general numbers of killed, wounded, frostbitten, missing in action, prisoners, etc. Their losses were 1,700 men a day. It lasted for 105 days, so overall it was a short-term war, right? But the German-Soviet war, that lasted for almost 4 years. And where on the Soviet side, there were different peoples participating. Some of them are now living in Ukraine, others from other republics, other countries these days. But altogether, the losses dead from Soviet Union were about 10,000 men daily killed. These numbers give you a general impression of what war can be like. Does it mean that this war can be similar? We really want to hope that it won't. But these numbers give us an idea of how bad it can be. During one of our conversations, we used one more parameter that also is a good indicator of the intensity of war, is a use of artillery shells. A number of artillery shots fired per unit of time. We don't have exact data for different periods, but in summer of 22, they were talking about 50,000-60,000 shells shot by Russia during their offensive on Severodonetsk daily. and certain numbers were given to Ukrainian side. Then later, these numbers were, of course, wavering and changing depending upon the stage, whether it is offensive, counteroffensive, defense, depending upon the part of the front that we're looking at. But if we're looking at absolutely confirmed data, practically till the end of to every single shot, and these are all supplies of all calibers from the biggest partner of Ukraine, United States. So during the last almost 2 years, United States supplied artillery shells of all kinds and missiles, from the biggest artillery 150 to the small calibers, including HIMARS missiles and everything. Overall, the number is 3.5 million units. Probably, most likely, the largest share of these resources has already been used. And this was going on for 22 months. And I gave that example before, but I'll bring it again. In 1918, during the Operation Mikhail, during the First World War, in March, German troops under command of General Ludendorff, during the first 5 hours of artillery preparation at the front line of 60 kilometers, they shot in the direction of Entente, French and Brits. In their trenches, they launched 3.5 million shells, same amount that United States supplied to Ukraine during the 2 years of this war. That tells us that level of intensity of wars in the past, recently, rather recent past, right? Second World War, First World War, Soviet-Finnish War, how intensive wars can be. And we need to understand that in order to tomorrow or the day after tomorrow or any other day when it will be found out that resources that aggressor can throw against Ukraine are suddenly bigger than expected, that it would not be a surprise. The readiness to fight for one's country supposes readiness to the most difficult and troubling scenarios, including scenarios where enemy might have times more resources than you can observe right now on the front line. If that doesn't happen, fantastic. God bless that outcome, but if, God forbid, this happens, it would make sense to be ready to that eventuality and have scenarios how to respond to this level of intensity. Andrey Nikolayevich, you also said that the stakes on the aggressor side have been increased. They've been amped significantly. What do you mean when you say that? How much did they grow by? And what is the reason for that growth? And also, how easy it is to understand for our Western partners. I understand this is a very wide question, but let's start digging into this, because I think this is also important. And we can talk also about the stakes of the West, right? Well, the stake is a synonym of the term price, right? Stake is larger than life means that the price the aggressor is eager to pay is different than was expected earlier. We will not even be talking now about the partners of Ukraine. We'll talk about Ukrainian leadership and some of the representatives of Ukrainian military leadership, who in some of the interviews and statements they made, and I'm quoting to my memory, we did not expect that Putin will be ready to throw that many people and basically throw them in the grinder to achieve his goals. I think you also heard that statement, and probably not once. For me, it was a shocking statement. How, in general, not somebody from civilian group, not some culture and arts observers, but military, could have supposed, I'm not even talking about not using it in calculations or not planning for this, how could you not expect Putin to waste tens and maybe hundreds of thousands of troops to achieve his goals. And understandably, like we learn now, post factum, about the numbers of Ukraine military overall, about the number of munitions, military equipment, the training and preparation of new brigades for the front, the requests for new military equipment that were made during the last 2 years, they all show that the requests were not fitting to the scale of operations being conducted. And I will probably say it for the first time about the summer of last year. In the summer of last year, people, let's say, close to Ukrainian leadership were discussing a matter with me of doing certain campaigns or attracting attention of Western partners to real needs of Ukrainian armed forces. I prepared material and I showed that demands that were officially given by the representatives of the office of the Ukrainian president publicly in the open. Those materials were in the open. People saw that. My data indicated that those requests were 10 times less than we should have. So we were asking 10 times less than we needed on the front. Exactly. And when the proper material was prepared and when we demonstrated the real numbers to the representatives of the Ukrainian military, they absolutely refused to support that request. Then there were, as we know, more requests in December of last year. Many of them were, of course, not done in the public, but by what was supplied, we can see that there was definite misunderstanding of the scale of events unfolding on the front. We understand that not all of the requests are fulfilled. We understand that not always they get positive answer for the demand. We know that many things are still not supplied. We know how difficult the whole process is and how difficult it is to work with the main partner of Ukraine, how difficult it is when it happens to get the nomenclature that is being requested. But the starting positions, the numbers, they were supposed to be, in my opinion, at least by June of last year, when different specialists and observers who are not too big specialists, when everybody could generally scale the size of this conflict. And it was understandable, ballpark speaking, how much we need. But Ukrainian military said, no, we don't need that. And we heard that many times. We're getting as much as we need. We heard that over and over again in different interviews. So you mean Lend-Lease as well? Oh, no, I'm not talking about Lend-Lease program. Lend-Lease would be a resource that would allow unlimited options to supply arms and equipment to Ukrainian armed forces. But we know that Ukraine leadership was continuously refusing to discuss Lend-Lease option on all different levels. Do you think there was a pressure exerted on Ukrainian leadership? I'll ask this question for the first time. Do you think the American side was exerting pressure on Ukraine to not use that channel, that program? We don't have a confirmation of this, Ludmila. We have several public confirmations that Ukrainian leadership refused to talk about this program, but we do not have any confirmation about American side refusing to go and use this program. Moreover, we heard that after Ukrainian leadership or its representatives for over a year were refusing to discuss the program of Lend-Lease, in the summer of this 2023, there started to be voices coming out saying, well, it's good to actually maybe continue this program. Andrey Nikolayevich, you said an interesting point, made a point, that the quantity asked tells about misunderstanding of the scale of this war. If we bring this question wider, if we open it wider, perhaps we can talk about stakes of the West now, because they're also important, in my opinion, because for people outside not related to any confidential information, they see that this formula, too little, too late, seems to be true, right? But in your opinion, how do you think? Do you think the positions of the West is changing? And why am I asking this? Because if earlier we heard to not let Ukraine win or to not let Russia lose, at some point this phrase changed to if Ukraine loses, and one can treat that phrase differently, but I read it as an attempt to understand, to analyze what possible loss in this war holds for Ukraine. And loss can be taken, there are different kinds of losses, right? It can be read differently. But still, do you think that it's the attempt by the West to seriously analyze, to not just not let Ukraine lose, but to actually calculate and see what mission can be accomplished and what stakes, what goals and strategies need to be implemented? Well, first of all, Ludmila, I would suggest to try, at least in our conversations with you, to the degree that we can, to try to avoid the united term West in relation to Ukraine. There is no united West in relation to Ukraine. There are different Wests. There is a West like Poland. There is a West like Baltic countries. There is a West, and right now it's Finland, Sweden, Great Britain, and Norway. And then there is a West. Let's not even take Portugal and Spain, but for example, let's take the West as a current administration of the United States. An answer to your question about how different parts of the West understand the situation on the battlefront of Russian-Ukrainian war and how much responsibility do they perceive for what is unfolding there. This is reflected in numbers. The first group of countries that I called, they all provided military, and I'm talking just military aid to Ukraine, to the degree bigger than 1% of their GDP. And Baltic countries and Norway and Poland, more than 1.5%. Estonia was the leader. They gave more than 1 GDP initially to start with, of their own GDP, their country GDP. Compared with that, United States provided military aid, committed, by the way, not really supplied. But the total of that would be at about 0.3% of annual GDP. And compared with Estonia, Norway, Latvia, this is 6 times less an effort than what was provided by the Baltic countries and Norway, comparatively, per capita. So that tells you about very different understanding of what is happening. And Polish and Baltic partners do not need convincing. They do not need to be convinced what needs to be done and how Ukraine has to be helped. We knew that about a year ago, Estonia gave the last howitzers, the last of those systems that they had to Ukraine, because they understand that the main front, yesterday and today, is unfolding in Ukraine. And defense of Estonia is now going on in Ukraine. They don't need that explanation, they know it. And it's not a coincidence that an ex-minister of Defense Forces, Foreign Affairs of Estonia, called in November of last year, called upon his colleagues in the NATO bloc and EU to provide at least 1% of their GDP worth of military aid to Ukraine. What Estonia has already done, and they've already approaching 2% of GDP in light of 2 years. The current GDP of United States is about $27 trillion. If United States were providing military aid to Ukraine at the level that Estonia is providing support to Ukraine at 1% of GDP per year, then United States by themselves would be transferring military help of all different kinds, shells, equipment, arms systems, on the level of $270 billion a year with a B, and not on the level of 20 billion over 22 months. 8 billion the first year, 12 billion this year. So these supplies compared to what is provided by Estonia, 12 billion, is much smaller what United States could have supplied. This is 25 times less than United States could have been providing. Now, if this approach would be taken by, and first of all, by United States, this would have covered all the military issues, or most of them, for Ukraine. And in this case, joint military efforts, measured in dollars, a financial estimation, would be equal and maybe even bigger than overall military expenses of the aggressor. And that would have created a material basis, first of all, for holding the front, and second, for conducting all the necessary operations that were needed to be conducted to liberate occupied territories and to finish this war successfully with all the necessary outcomes. Refusal from implementation of this rather basic formula that is being already fulfilled by Estonia, Latvia, other Baltic, and some other European countries brought to the fact that the war is going for the second year already and will be going at least to January of 25, and then we don't know what will happen after. In other words, with all what Ukraine is doing, without active participation of the key partners, and first of all, United States, we can say that it's impossible to achieve the breakthrough in this phase of war. Elections in the United States in next year, how important are they in the supplies of arms to Ukraine matter? Because linear understanding of this situation for me looks like this. President Biden came to Ukraine, he was supporting Ukraine. Personally, he was making statements to support Ukraine, was writing columns to Washington Post, and was talking about supporting Ukraine. And the next year is very important for him. So perhaps he needs to deliver some success in foreign policies, and Ukraine could become that success. And in this light, do you think President Biden may be a little more radical in terms of aiding Ukraine next year? And here also is a question about Trump. How do you think events can unfold? Again, linear understanding can tell that his statements most likely express that he might stop aiding Ukraine rather than continuing that. But again, this is words for the most part, because during his first elections, Russia, relying on his words and pre-election rhetoric, thought that Trump is very pro-Russian. But as a result, it didn't pay out, and Trump actually delivered Javelin systems to Ukraine, which aided us so much during the beginning of this war. Now, I guess our understanding that Trump is probably more concerned about the borders with the South. And can we also talk about the monetary package that is being adopted in Congress to give money for Ukraine to support the war-fighting effort? All right, let's talk first about Biden's government. What can we expect in this coming year? First of all, we have historic experience that doesn't give us much hope. We saw what he was doing for a year and a half before this full-scale aggression, limiting Ukraine in all directions and showing support and affirmation signs to Putin, but not to Zelensky. We talked about that before. Then during the next 2 years of big-scale aggression, the dripper-style aid was slowly turning into the vapor-style aid in the last 3 months. Will that position change because of Biden? We have no basis to hope for that. Yes, now there are discussions between, as we know, between the White House that was torpedoing all packages of support for Ukraine that were prepared in Congress with the votes of their congressmen from Democratic Party. And they crashed one project, and the second one that was brought to the floor, they achieved resignation of McCarthy, who was the Speaker of the Congress, who was actually very much favoring support of Ukraine. This is not a random thing. This is not a mistake by political forces of Democrats. This is a position of the White House, which was actively propagated and executed by senators and congressmen in the legislative branch. Let me interrupt here, Andrey. I want to clarify that. Why do you think Democrats have done that? What is the goal of this? If I may, Ludmila, let me unfold the question first, and then I'll come back to this question. Okay. So, yeah, first of all, that's exactly what they did. And unlike many commentators who are saying black for white and white for black, and we're not seeing what actually was happening during the last several months in Congress and between the Congress and the White House, all the packages directed at support of Ukraine were torpedoed by Democrats and the White House. And the White House was ordering these torpedo attacks. And in this situation, can we exclude that the White House will stop acting the way they did in the last 3 months? We have no basis to expect that. If they've done it in the previous 3 months, why would they change it now? We cannot expect that. We, of course, hope that despite all this, there'll be some compromise achieved, and the White House will hopefully change some part of its position, and then there'll be necessary documents adopted that allow to provide more military aid to Ukraine. But strictly speaking, even the package of military aid that was designated for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and Republicans in Congress also suggested to include additional resources in that package to provide security on the southern border of the United States. The overall package is $60 billion. So my question, how much of this $60 billion is direct military aid for Ukraine that needs to be supplied, for example, via Presidential Drawdown Authority, PDA channel? Yeah, let's decipher that for some of our viewers. We talked about Lend-Lease before, right? So Lend-Lease was also stricken out by Senator Democrat Chuck Schumer. In the project of that law, before it was adopted, the project was prepared by a Republican senator from Texas, Cornyn, back in 2022. Cornyn's suggestion for Lend-Lease was to continue Lend-Lease until the last occupant of the aggressor leaves the territory of Ukraine. The leader of Democratic majority in Senate, Chuck Schumer, had stricken down this sentence and replaced it with a time frame that Lend-Lease was going to work only to the September of 2023. And that's how it was voted for. It was not used, but that first assassination or significant limitation of Lend-Lease was done by Chuck Schumer. Now, during discussion in the autumn of this year about the probability of extension of Lend-Lease for 2024, the Chamber of Representatives, where Republicans are a majority, they added in the project of national defense budget, they added a proposal to extend Lend-Lease to the whole 2024. And they brought it in front of the Senate, where majority are Democrats, and they, once again, headed by Chuck Schumer, they stricken down the extension of Lend-Lease for 2024 fiscal year. And in order to have some way to fund the defense budget, Congress had to go for a compromise with Democrats and Chuck Schumer and the White House essentially behind him. And they removed that proposal of extending Lend-Lease program for fiscal 24. Now, let's go back to this package of $61 billion that we touched upon. What part of that package is actually designated for Ukraine? If you look through the documents, then Ukraine, at best, will get $20 billion. And now, what share of this $20 billion is to be spent for resources that could be supplied to Ukraine immediately? The answer is zero. Why zero? Well, you talked about Presidential Drawdown Authority channel, right? Our viewers probably are well aware of that from our earlier interviews, but it is a Presidential Drawdown Authority resource that allows the President of the United States to use any arms that are on the bases and the warehouses of American military forces immediately and to send it to a hotspot wherever they're needed. Sometimes it can be done during several days or several hours. All other channels, USAI and FMF, the other main channels are channels where Congress only provides financing, and then Pentagon is placing orders with American manufacturers to produce those armaments, and they are being produced, but they will be manufactured and delivered in several months at best. Sometimes it takes years for that. There are certain means that are already designated to USAI and FMF in this package for $61 billion. So, indeed, if this package will be approved, then certain orders can be placed. It's not a guarantee, because the process of placing these orders with manufacturers by Pentagon on two previous projects that were designated for 22-23 fiscal years, it took them 2 years. Last orders were placed at the end of summer, beginning of autumn of 23. And it'll take some time for the arms to be manufactured so that the products will be completed and then delivered to the territory of Ukraine. So, in this project, there are designated funds on these channels, but there are no numbers and no decisions about supplies of arms via PDA channel. They are not included. We cannot exclude that during the discussion of this law, as we hope in January of 24, perhaps congressmen will bring suggestions to add certain statements to that project, perhaps to beef up the PDA option as well. At least we would hope for that. But for now, it doesn't exist. And until it is part of this package, then maximum ceiling for PDA, not only for Ukraine, but for the whole world, it's one channel for the whole world, is reserved at the level that it was initially adopted about this channel. I think it was a law from 1971, and this limit is set at $100 million. And this is a very base limit. And then every year, if needed, Congress makes a decision to adjust the ceiling. At the beginning of 22, they increased it for $3 billion, first of all for Ukraine, then to 11, then to 14.5. But these ceilings worked for fiscal year 22 and then fiscal year 23. They ceased to function on the 30th of September 2023, when the 23rd fiscal year ran out. It's the third month of 2024 fiscal year, and there are no special ceilings established by Congress. And of course, right now the limit set for this channel is $100 million in all directions, and that's Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, any other country if that needed. Now, we want to hope that this ceiling will be adjusted, but we don't have it yet. Andrey Nikolayevich, one more clarifying question. Sorry. I want to go back to the topic of why Democrats are acting the way they do in this case, because in a linear perspective, they would be interested to support Ukraine as much as possible, so that Ukraine would be able to achieve certain serious successes, and Biden administration can present that as their success in the election year. So in this angle, these actions are illogical. Or is there a different paradigm that they're using? Remember, Ludmila, in July of this year, several months ago, we met and discussed the article published in Newsweek by Mr. Arkin, who spent quite a bit of time conducting a research among the employees of American Special Services, CIA, and American government. And he reconstructed the events of the 2nd and 3rd of November of 2021, when Director of CIA Burns flew to Moscow and conducted conversations with his counterpart, Patrushev, Naryshkin, and Putin's aide Ushakov, and with Putin himself. On the results of his visit, Arkin reproduced the commentary of his interviewees from CIA and other special services and government branches. And those quotes were in, those statements were in quotes, so those were real statements. And they addressed the agreements achieved by Putin and his aides with Burns. And you remember what obligations did Putin take on himself, and what obligations from the government of Biden did Burns agree to. And let's stop at the obligations first on the Burns side and Biden's administration side. To not do any actions directed at toppling Putin's regime and liquidation of him personally and his government, and take all measures to preclude the spread of this war from spilling into the territory of Russia. Putin, on his side, promised that military actions on his side will not leave the borders of Ukraine. These were the main statements delivered by Arkin in his article in Newsweek. It's been 5 months since not a single representative of the White House, Biden's administration, or anybody else from the special services had denounced these materials, had filed a lawsuit against Arkin, or even just came out in the open and said, no, this is false information. Nobody had done anything like that. But knowing Mr. Arkin, he is a rather legendary journalist who is working in this business for over 40 years, and he had faced different lawsuits about what he's writing about. I'm sure that if he put any words in quotes, that means that he has tapes and proof of conversations with his interviewees. And in case of any attacks on this interview and his work, he will have materials to provide to defend his publication. That these materials he received from government structures and branches. So it's been 5 months. Somebody in some circles can say that don't pay attention to that. Like recently, very well-known journalist, and we can even say analyst, pretty close to Democratic Party, very closely tied with Democratic Party. By the way, Arkin is also a Democrat, so it's not a political opponent, right? It's the people who are close in their opinions and positions to the Biden administration. So most of their articles are directed at defending administration. So Susan Glosser, a well-known journalist and analyst, published in New Yorker a portrait of Jack Sullivan, advisor for national security. This is a big text, and it is very positive. It's presenting Sullivan in a very positive way, his actions, his abilities, his experience. And in this text, Ms. Glosser, telling about what she discussed with Sullivan, and with other interviewees that she did during the preparing stage for this work. And she just casually mentions between the lines about other things. She's talking about the strategy of Biden and his administration in regards to Russian-Ukrainian war. And she's writing, the main message is to make sure that the war does not spill onto the territory of Russia. And second, do not try to liquidate Putin's regime. She is basically reproducing everything that Arkin published. But back then, for Arkin, that was a sort of discovery. It was news that was not known in such a way. People were talking about that, there were suspicions, but there was no formulation, there were no quotes. Arkin gave these quotes. Several months later, Ms. Glosser is talking about that as an obvious thing. Something that doesn't even need to draw any attention. This is an obvious fact mentioned in the article. This is an obvious fact for the administration of the White House and all analysts who work with the White House and with the Democratic administration. This is the strategic position of Biden's administration. Andrei, then let me change the focus a little bit towards the war of Russia against Ukraine and try to look at it from afar. Because when events unfolded in the Middle East, many experts started talking around the world that it's probably a beginning of Third World War. And somehow many of them were talking about that with such enthusiasm that they're preparing to some party and everybody will get joy and fun from it. So I wanted to ask you to think about it from the point of view of a big country versus a small country. This is Russia versus Ukraine. This is one story. But now, if you read at Article 5 of NATO, it doesn't tell how the countries, how all the NATO countries are supposed to help. It doesn't tell that each country is supposed to send so many troops. It's just the country needs to make a decision how they do that. And I don't know how correct it would be to compare, but if Ukraine was a part of that Article 5 of NATO, if we were part of NATO, we at the end could have been receiving just as much aid as we're getting now, because every country decides for themselves. Some people send arms, some countries send meds, others send, and the long list to follow. Now, if to expand that view, perhaps it'll be more understandable where these processes might move in the next year. Because if to look linear, Russia versus Ukraine is one story. But even if you look linear, sometimes big countries also lose to smaller countries. And here is the example of United States, of Soviet Union, and there are many others. So maybe a wider question, but I want to look at this projection as well to try to understand how the events will unfold in 24. So again, this is a very layered cake, I guess, story of a question. Let's try to pick it apart by elements. So first of all, we are not interested in the Gaza-Israeli war by itself, but we want to uncover the relation of current administration towards that war and its participants. And we've seen that for 2.5 months, military actions were going there. What is Biden's administration doing? In other words, they're saying everything exactly the same as they are for Ukraine. We fully support Israel. We are completely on the side of the victim of aggression. We are on the side of those who fell victims to terrorist actions. But in reality, Biden, Blinken, Austin, and company are pressing Israel leadership to such an immense level and binding their hands and not allowing them to conduct operations that are needed to effectively liquidate that terrorist threat. And blackmail goes on different levels. There are pages of the Western press discussing it, first of all, American press. And is that all? In that same package, by the way, that we talked about for $61 billion, somehow right implied to be related to Ukraine. Do you know where $10 more billion go there? to Israel? No. Israel gets 14 billion, but Palestine, sector Gaza, gets 10 billion in that same package. In that same package that is named aid to Ukraine. There are $10 billion of aid to Palestine. What is going on during the next 2.5 months? $10 billion more administration of Biden transferred to Iran. To Iran? Yes, to Iran. Iran is a sponsor of Hamas attack on Israel on the 7th of October. Iranian special services were training Hamas, were providing them with weapons. Recently, actually yesterday, as a result of a targeted strike, there was liquidated the leader of the core of the Guardians of Iranian Revolution, who was the leader of the 7th of October operation. He's Iranian. Nobody in the world society at large, world community at large, it's not a secret that Iran was behind that and was funding and supporting and providing all kind of necessary diplomatic political interference. And Iranian proxy are attacking Israel and the objects of United States on the territory of Middle East. And that includes different economic assets, embassies of the United States, and military bases, including vessels that they can reach. And at that moment, Biden administration transfers $10 billion to Iran. Who else is attacking Israel? Hussites from Yemen are attacking Israel. They're launching missiles towards Israel. They're also attacking international ships in the Red Sea, in the Aden Strait, and they're attacking Americans, right? Yes, and they're attacking Americans too. And who is attacking to Hussites attacks? Only Israel. United States do not respond to these attacks. Those drones that are attacking ships, yeah, they shoot them down, but they never shoot at the places where these drones are launched from. It is only Israel that is hitting the launch stations. And we understand that these are two very different things. One is to swat the UAVs thrown at you and attacks that are being made at you. And the other thing is to attack the launch sites. So all Israeli experience of the last 20 years, since 2005, it showed how perspectiveless is such strategy. Israel, in order to create those conditions to follow the terms, withdrew from the Gaza sector, removed its citizens, after which regular terrorist activities resumed from the Gaza sector and the West Bank. After that, Israel built a wall, and then they started to send missiles over the wall, and the number of missiles were growing. Israel created the system, Iron Dome, that was so much discussed, shooting down these missiles. They were always doing defensive strategy. Was it enough? No, it turned out to be absolutely not enough. The number of missiles was growing, the assortment was growing, the length of flight was growing, the precision was growing, and eventually, did Israel manage to defend itself this way? No, 7th of October showed that this is absolutely not enough. In order to completely liquidate the threat, you need to liquidate the places where the missiles are being launched from. You need to liquidate the leaders and the organization. There is no other way. That same story is happening with Hussites now. On the freight carriers and other vessels that go through the Red Sea, and the same thing is unfolding with their attacks on the United States assets. Is the United States responding to that? No, they're not. It's only Israel that is responding. Why am I talking about Hussites? Because against them, there were international sanctions implemented a while ago, and the leader who was implementing those sanctions was President Trump. Who removed these sanctions? President of the United States, Biden. Immediately after his arrival to the White House. What did Hussites do after that? They immediately after that started shooting at Saudi Arabia, from their oil mining to airports as their targets. And now, having accumulated more resources, being not under sanctions for this 2 years and a half, they got enough military potential and now attacking Israel and the United States and international trade ships. So for over 2 months now, they are terrorizing the whole seaway near their territory. And many companies stopped shipping cargo via that route. What is the administration of the United States doing? Have they at least implemented sanctions against them? No, they didn't. What was Biden administration doing in spring of 21 when they refused to provide half the military aid to Ukraine and instead gave it to whom? To Palestine autonomy. And they used these over $100 million to pay for the terrorists who were attacking Israel. That was that wave in May of 21. Look, when you and I discussed during these almost 3 years, during different streams, we discussed position of Biden administration towards Ukraine. You and many others, probably the whole country of Ukraine, every normal man would be asking a question. Why? And we were trying to find answers. And perhaps we're looking for reasons within Ukraine. Is there anything within Ukraine why Biden doesn't like Ukraine so much? Why is he doing it that way in relation as an answer to the problems? And now we have a big enough baggage of knowledge accumulated, and we see how his administration is working towards Ukraine, towards Afghanistan. Remember how they were withdrawing troops, leaving all the allies and hundreds of thousands of Afghans who were supporting United States and were working with them for 20 years. How do they treat Israel, the victim of aggression? How do they treat the aggressor, the Hussites, the Iran? How do they treat Russia, another aggressor? Yes, United States provided some military aid to Ukraine during these almost 2 years for $20.7 billion. This is amount of military aid that indeed reached Ukraine. This is true. And probably $22 more billion is economic aid, budgetary aid that was provided to Ukrainian government. So all in all, it's about $40 billion. How much more did Putin get from the increase on oil prices just in 22? Almost $400 billion was the increase of his GDP due to the heightened prices in 2022. After implementation of so-called ceiling for the oil and gas prices in December of 22, we were told that why did he get this super profit? Because there were not enough sanctions implemented. Once they're implemented, you'll feel it and he'll feel it. So in December, about a year ago, these sanctions were implemented. The ceiling was officially created. And as a result, during this year that passed, additional profits that Putin budget got were equal to $250 billion. This is what Putin got, and Ukraine got slightly over $12 billion. Right? The ratio between one and the other. What are we saying here? We're saying that this approach is not unique. It is not only Ukraine that they treat this way. It is the same way that Biden administration is treating other countries that are trying to defend from aggressors, other countries that became victims of aggression. And we see the same path, the same strategy towards different aggressors. So this is the answer to the question we've been discussing. In March of 22, when there is a chance, not a guarantee, but a chance to change this war, only in January of 25. Of course, under condition, if we actually change power in the White House. If the power in the White House doesn't change, then this politics, these actions that we've been observing with our own eyes, and that led to the death, and now we can say for sure tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of civilians and Ukrainians on the front. Does it mean that anyone who will enter the White House will change this politics radically? We don't know. We don't know who will be there. We don't know who will enter this establishment. We don't know his views, regardless of party that the person will belong to, one or the other. We don't know his positions, we cannot tell. But we can predict what the position and politics will remain if this administration or its key players stays in power. Andrey Nikolayevich, then perhaps a strange question. If Trump gets to power, how do you gauge the chances or the paths for the events to unfold? Because we hear a lot of negative prognosis about Trump. Do you think that Trump can become a president again? And what do you think may happen if that occurs? Is there one scenario, two scenarios? Well, first of all, he has not come yet, and he's not even an official candidate, affirmed official candidate. We see the measures that Democratic Party is taking to not let Trump become the candidate and have his name in bulletins, and what other measures they will be trying to take to preclude his ascendance, because this is a whole other story. That has never happened in the history of the United States. Never. Against Trump, I think it's 98 criminal prosecutions, criminal filings in different courts. If there was just one or two, that maybe several, right? That would look more like reality, like some semblance of reality. But when such a huge number of criminal cases are open, just by the fact of it, we understand that these are political cases. This is a political characteristic that doesn't have anything to do with what he was or was not doing in his life and in his positions. This is definitely carrying a character of political prosecution, absolutely unheard of for the United States on that scale. By the way, not a single accusation that was thrown at him among these 98 or 96 cases, not a single of these cases is about, how they call it, insurrection on the 6th of January of 21. It's not part of those 90 plus. So that regional court that recently withdrew him from the ballot, yeah, regional court just made a decision to not add his name to the ballot. They made this decision, and this will be reviewed by the Supreme Court of the country. But I would say again that among this huge number of cases against Trump, there is not a single one related to the 6th of January of 2021. So even if in this situation of absolutely politicized attack and all the desire of the Democratic Party and its allies to not let Trump be elected or even try, they could not, in their sane state, open a real prosecution on this matter. So in this state, we don't know if he will have a chance to even participate in these elections, not even talking about the results and the probabilities that may happen during the voting. What can we say about Trump? We can say that his main feature is his unpredictability. Every other candidate that we can look at running for the presidency, and all the presidents and the acting president right now, they're all predictable. They're all predictable for us, for experts, for observers, and of course for Vladimir Putin. The only person who, in this case, is important, not for us, but for Putin, who was and still is unpredictable, is Trump. Not because Trump is liked or not liked by Putin, not because he is a friend or an enemy. No, we know that Trump was always expressing positive words about Putin during his election campaign, but he didn't do anything positive for him during his rule. So what do you believe, his words or his actions? when the person is not in power, the only way for us to gauge his position is by his words. If the person is in power, we have additional option to verify his position by his actions. And Trump's actions are rather well known. We've addressed them before, but let's touch upon some of them. He lifted the embargo for arms supplies to Ukraine from United States. By the way, embargo implemented by Obama, and that's how Ukraine got javelins. Under Trump, the number of Ukrainian troops on the front line who are dying from the fire of separatists and Russian troops, it went down 16 times from the last half a year during Obama to the last half a year during Trump. And several last months, there were only 6 casualties, right? I mean, even 6, it may sound cynical, but still, right? It's incomparable to how many are dying today in the conditions of a full and open scale aggression. Under Trump, Wagner got their detachments destroyed in Syria. This was the only time when American troops, together with Kurd troops, destroyed Russian private military company, the Wagner group that was trying to capture a production facility. If you look at the number of terrorist attacks from the Arabic terrorists during the Trump's reign, do you see direct stats? During Obama, it was a certain level. Under Trump, the number of these attacks went down 2.5 times, and then it bounced back during Biden. Now, if we look at the negotiations with North Korea, what tests of missiles was North Korea doing? They were doing the tests up until the moment when Trump started meeting with him. After Trump started his meetings with Kim, the tests stopped. After Trump left the office and Biden came to White House, the tests of missiles resumed. What we see here is what our Anglo-Saxon friends usually call pattern. If it's not a law, but it's definitely a repeating sequence of events, repeating patterns, we can see that Trump, with perhaps being very repulsive for many people, I don't know, aesthetically, what he says, how he says, it doesn't excite a lot of people. That's true. But besides what he's saying, besides how he behaves and what hairstyle does he have, there are also his actions, or how he's being perceived by those who present the major threat to normal, peaceful citizens wherever they live, in Ukraine, in Israel, in South Korea, in other parts of the world. And here we discover that these dictators, these authoritarians, and these leaders of criminal regimes, if they're afraid of anybody or not understand somebody, and while they don't understand, they're afraid to act in any brash manner, that is Trump. So for us, then, there is a question. Again, we're not participating in that, we're not voting there, but what's best for us here? Is it better for us to hear good speeches where we hear that the United States will always be with Ukraine, will never abandon, and will be for as long as needed? In the meantime, the real aid is turning from draper to vapor and then eventually eroding completely. Or with the real military help, or perhaps when the real military help won't even be needed because the aggressor will be afraid to act. This is not what is being discussed in mainstream media, neither in Europe, nor in the United States, nor in Ukraine. But this is a real question that we face. Do you need a cab, or do you need to get from point A to point B? Another concern that exists in Europe, that with Trump's arrival to the White House, NATO integrity may be questioned. And of course, to be honest here, we need to remember his story, how he tried to increase the payments of European governments into that organization to service NATO infrastructure. We remember that. But on the other hand, if we're talking with Europeans, they are very concerned about Trump. You know, I did these calculations on purpose, and I'll share some of them with you. During 8 years of Trump's predecessor, President Obama, the joint expenses of all NATO members, all military expenses, they shrunk by $76 billion in the 8 years preceding Trump. During 4 years of Trump, all NATO expenses, not only United States, they also increased some, but it was a small increase, mostly European countries. It increased back by $80 billion in 4 years. All right, so just in one term, military expenses compensated the losses that were done during the 8 years of Obama regime. So we are facing again, in this case as well, with Trump, a very interesting phenomenon in a way, when what he says very often repulses people and causes fear and causes some negative reaction, which nobody is holding and is spilling with a full blast in their commentary in all kinds of media and platforms. And then people forget to analyze what happens after that, what happens behind the back of these words and statements. Under Trump, administration of the United States took Crimean Declaration, in which we proclaimed that under no conditions the government of the United States will acknowledge Crimean annexation by Russian Federation. That happened in 2019. Under Obama, during whose stay in the office, the occupation of Crimea happened, this statement, this declaration, was never produced. Under Biden, administration of the United States did not adopt any single statement about Crimea. This only happened under Trump. Now, going back to the main question. So, how can Ukraine win in this war? And this is not a small war, right? It's a big war, but it's part of a bigger front, because now Middle Eastern front and Ukrainian front and the Gaza-Israeli and Hussites versus Israel and Israeli-Iranian war, they're all parts of the same war. By the way, Israel these days is attacking Iran objects, oil refineries, and factories that manufacture UAVs. Those drones that Iran delivers to Putin's government. So, for the first time, Ukraine actually has a real military ally, not only the one who provides monetary and economic and supplies aid, but the one who actually fights on the front and provides some aid on the front by military action. Because again, those assets, those UAVs, are being provided by Iran to Russia. Who's helping Ukraine in this case? Israel. So two fronts of this war are now connected. Israel became the first ally for Ukraine. So all these events, and maybe other fronts that may open in the coming 2024, it tells that this war became, if not the world war, there are certain criteria, but at least a global war. It is not one front, it's already several fronts. And the most important part of this global war is the source of this war, the headquarters of this war, the brain center of this war. It's not a secret for anybody that it is located in Moscow. And this understanding that we could not communicate in the past times, neither best of Ukrainian leadership could do that, nor analysts and consultants and friends of Ukraine. Nobody succeeded in transferring this understanding to the West. This understanding is finally dawning on a lot of people. And as it is becoming obvious and clear, then it also becomes clear how can this war be concluded in principle. We talked many times that for Ukraine, out of many versions of ending of this war, on the terms that are acceptable for Ukraine, would be either membership in NATO or acquiring some retribution arms or acquiring long-range weapons that would provide them parity with the aggressor. But if you think seriously, then even in this case, we have no guarantees that military action from the aggressor will cease. If that was happening before this war started, then yes, this chance would probably be real. But now we understand that just the membership of Ukraine in NATO will not guarantee those security guarantees that are written in the papers, and that up until the 24th of February of 2 years ago were considered to be golden for the members of NATO. Under current conditions of the war that is happening, the membership of Ukraine in NATO, as you rightfully noticed, may not guarantee the proper participation of all NATO members, their physical participation in defense of Ukraine. And it may not guarantee even acquisition of certain types of arms. Also, acquiring those types of arms doesn't guarantee that the aggressor will cease their actions. So then we're facing a question, how do you stop such a war? How can you get a result that you desire? And after going through all the different options, we have nothing else but one, the only one: changes in Kremlin. Without this, the war may not be stopped, and it will not be stopped. It may be frozen to restart again later, but under no other conditions can it be stopped. And this fundamental change of understanding of the nature of this war, due to, and thanks to, I guess thanks is a bad word, but still, to the new front of Gaza and Israel, and more tensions on the 38th parallel of Korean Peninsula, and in relations between Venezuela and Guyana, it started to dawn on representatives of the Western elites. These elites are still far from making the proper decisions, but at least the glimpses of that understanding start to dawn on them. And that means that in their relations with the Western partners, Ukraine has the only appropriate argument how this war can be done with. Storming the defense lines with trenches, with concrete structures, with all landmines and everything that was created to hold those positions, do the frontal attacks on those positions and lose thousands of your troops, this is not a path forward. You don't get a chance to win this war this way, but you get a chance via a different route. As one of the historic figures said, we'll go a different route. And this, what is revealed by the end of 2023, is probably the most important element of finding an exit from the dead end that current administration of United States tried to lead Ukraine to, is still trying to lead them to, is still trying to lead Israel to, by non-escalating, by not allowing to transfer military activities to the territory of the aggressor. With that approach, not a single aggression of the last 100 years was ever stopped this way. The only way aggressions were stopped was by transferring the war action to the territory of aggressor and liquidating the most radical parts of that aggressor. As we were taught by our school teachers back in the day, in its lair. That's the destiny that found ISIS, Al-Qaeda, National Socialist Party of Germany. There is no other option. And in this coming year, the task for Ukrainian diplomacy, Ukrainian military and government leadership, is to convey this very simple message to their partners, wherever they were. And if they succeed in doing so, then the year that is leaving now, that is being followed with a rather grim and sad commentary, may turn into a much more optimistic picture for the next year, if this understanding of the only viable solution will be dawned upon everybody involved in the Ukrainian, Israeli, Guyana, Georgia, Moldova, Belarus story, and Russian stories. Then perhaps this war may be solved. Thank you very much, Andrey Nikolayevich. Thank you for coming to join us. We hope that you will come and join us again in this coming year. Congratulations with the new year coming. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Ludmila, as well. Happy New Year to you and to all the viewers. Best successes in this new year with your new channel. Thanks so much. Andrey Illarionov was in our stream today, for which we are absolutely grateful to him. This conversation is brought to you by the Privateer Station. Please do not forget to subscribe, click the like button, and Happy New Year.